I'm going to give Datuk Johan, our policymaker, a chance to respond. One of the things that really struck me that Dr. Merican said was, does policy choices affect these trends? So talk to me a little bit, because Malaysia's approach to socioeconomic issues has historically lent towards the welfare lens, the aid delivery, the quick relief, right? So how do we move from that quick relief to reform to really address some of the structural challenges that Dr. Merican has laid out for us?
Thank you, Nisa. Thank you so much for laying out. And I think what World Bank has articulated in terms of a study to identify what really are the underlying issues, and that perhaps is a good guide to ensure that then policy responds accordingly. But I think in line with, even the earlier opening speech, I think it's all about what do we do about it, and how does government bring about not just government approach, but of nation approach. And it's very clear that the Madani government has articulated, for example, hardcore poverty, inequality as key policy priorities. It's clearly set out even in the recent 13 Malaysia plan by the Prime Minister. And in terms of what government has in terms of deployed resources, we've seen that the Prime Minister continues to announce increase in what we call Sumbangan Tunai Rahmah, which is our cash assistance. Even comparing last year, our budget was 10 billion. This year it's actually been increased up to 15 billion. It's a 50% increase. But again, it's not just in addressing issues of inequality and poverty. It's not just about giving the fish, but how can we help them?
Teach
them how to fish. And in that perspective, that's where the importance of partnership. Thank you so much, Siti Kamara, for inviting me here. But one area that we collaborate very closely is particularly with the GLC Yayasans. We've been working quite a few years with Yayasan Hasanah on the HSG, the Hasanah. That's where we've provided like a matching grant, where basically government deploys resources. It's matched by funds from Yayasan Hasanah. We've deployed more than 100 million, helping. And again, talking how to fish, this includes, for example, programs working with NGOs which teach Orang Asli to be either ecotourism guides or even grow organic vegetables, or working with in PPRs, ensuring like their central kitchens so that low-income households use that and then interface that with, say, platforms like Grab. So these are ways in which we work. And why do we work with them? And I guess one thing is that government is never known for being good at picking winners. And so working with Yayasans which specialize in this space means that, one, we amplify our dollar because it's on a matching fund approach, but it's also the governance that comes with it. And if you look through on the website in terms of what they go through in terms of selecting the parties they partner with, that then ensures that the money is also well spent, well governed. And typically it would mean also a multi-year right. approach. I mean, we've worked with others. I see you say Yatella from Yayasan Saim Dabi. Recently, another collaboration that Prime Minister initiated was the Sekolah Angkat Madani. Again, with getting corporate partnerships, working with government to adopt more than 1,000 schools and learning from some of the best practices. Because there's some things that, again, it's all in the space of what we call alternative service delivery. We recognize that there's some things that's probably better done by, shall we say, the third sector or our partners in the community in delivering solutions. And in my conversations with Yatella, we're saying like, it's not just about, JLC just giving a school bag or giving right. cash assistance. It's also about ensuring that the employees, as they do volunteerism, go down to the schools, especially rural schools, and say, look, I too was from your community, and where am I now? It's part of this conversation about how do we rediscover some of the social mobility that perhaps we had a lot more earlier. Other areas we work together, the GLCs, I see Islin work quite a lot with the GDRN, in terms of flood relief. The GLC would get together, coordinate deploying not just funds, but in terms of even their warehouses, their people, their logistics, in terms of delivering that assistance, sometimes even faster than some of the government agencies, and working across it. And now they've gone beyond disaster relief to also cover other aspects.
Right.
Another area I just want to also touch
sure.
on collaborations. We work with Khazanah and Think City Hamdan and the Faisals here, working on Warisan KL. And someone say, okay, how does that link to poverty? But it's also about crowding in the private sector. So for example, Khazanah is refurbishing Bangdan Sultan Samad. But it's not just about rediscovering heritage and history of the city. the commitment by government and through its GLICs to develop, say, when you have Khazanah doing Bangunan Sultan Al Samad, you have Tan Sri Raja Ashad is here with PNB at 118. It then has contributed to a gentrification of not just the Lebuh Ampang area and also the Chinatown area. You know, at one point we had to fund what do you call it, soup kitchens in Lebuh Ampang. You know, now we're seeing the revival where private capitals also coming in, bringing in new economic opportunities, and that's really, again, how do we sustainably ensure that we develop those income opportunities, which is probably the most sustainable way of doing it. And I think this is where we want to extend beyond also GLCs. Obviously, recently, Prime Minister announced Sara untuk semua, all of you will get 100 ringgit. But again, it's one where we've worked again with Yayasan My Kasih. It's another of agencies which obviously has done a lot of work in reaching out. And in a way, it's also another targeted approach. We want to ensure that the assistance, when it's a cash assistance, can be spent on anything. We want to also ensure that it is also delivered in a way that it is spent on the basic needs of the people.
A universal safety net for
again,
the basic necessities.
So it's again another approach to ensure that the delivery mechanism is enhanced by working with, shall we say, the third sector. And I think that's something that I think particularly under this current government will continue to expand to ensure that we bring in more people towards this agenda of addressing poverty and inequality.
I like that point, Datuk Johan, about how maybe government paves the way first and then crowds in other funds, right? But before we move to Temasek, I do want to, I'm troubled by the use of the phrase government doesn't always pick the best winners, not known for picking winners here. And I wanted to ask you about that because we're just around the corner from budget 2026. Talk to us a little bit about how government thinks about this. Is the thinking reflected in kind of evidence-based? So how are national budgets allocated? When are allocations guided by evidence-based, listening to communities, listening to the people who work on the ground, or is it still largely influenced by political considerations, lobbying, and the like?
And I think this, you know, we've started the budget process a couple of weeks ago. The Prime Minister chaired a budget consultation. We invited over 300 members of, you know, whether it's NGOs, industry associations, and then the instructions also from Prime Ministers. Every single ministry also will be undertaking similar engagements with their respective stakeholders. And we've always been committed to ensuring that, you know, the budget, you know, includes this sort of, shall we say, bottom-up approach, in ensuring that we are responding towards the needs of the stakeholders. You know, some of the, you might even be aware that some of the Madani programs, for example, there's the Sejati Madani, where 100,000 are given to community leaders. This is where, again, it's a way to, again, come back to us rather than, you know, Johan in his, you know, ivory tower of Putrajaya deciding what the poor should do. Let it come from the community leaders to decide how they want to spend that money. And so they also gain that ownership in terms of some of the solutions, particularly in terms of addressing poverty and creating, you know, microeconomic opportunities on the ground. So I think this is something that, you know, we're quite committed to ensuring that what is eventually in the budget does reflect a quite inclusive engagement with all relevant stakeholders, and to some extent also involves empowerment. Even in the 13th plan, the Prime Minister took the point of visiting every single state, you know, just government and opposition states, getting the priorities of each state government and ensuring that the 13th plan projects included some of the priorities identified by the state governments. So it's very much how do we get more of a bottom-up inclusive approach in ensuring that the natural resources are optimized and working in partnership with everyone.
Okay, so we'll come back to that a little bit, but I think in your explanation of the push and pull and the considerations of allocations in the national budgets, I think the funding policy objectives, as national budgets, that's only one lever that the government can pull. There are other levers to pull, and I think deploying capital through sovereign wealth funds, through social impact funds, through public investment vehicles, those are all levers we can pull to help achieve some of the objectives to address socioeconomic inequality.